Welcome to today's choice event. I'm super happy to have you already here. For those of you who don't know me yet, I'm Lara Ops, one of the co-founders of the Climate Choice. And I'm really excited to have this first choice event, I feel, after the summer break. I guess the last few weeks, everyone has been traveling a little bit or maybe taking some time off. And now you can really feel everything is getting into action mode. And our choice events are all about getting into actions or learning about best practices for the climate transformation. So I'm super happy to have you. And while more and more are joining, I'm quickly show you how the events are set up. So first of all, you can relax a little bit and lean back. Maybe it's part of your lunch break, so you can just listen in. However, we are always inviting you to ask questions. So please use the Q&A function to have any chat going on with other people joining or to ask questions. And after the choice event, we also invite you to join our Slack community, where we have already over 1,000 people joining. So also after the events, you can stay in touch or just follow the climate news or share any insights that you have. And also, as you can see here, we are recording everything. So we will provide you later via email access to the recording. We share normally over our climate news, and then also the slides, so you don't have to write down everything. And just to show everyone where the chat is, maybe you just want to quickly drop in the Q&A from where you're listening today. So that would be super exciting for me. If you just let me know, say hi, find out who also is there. So I just gonna look to the chat and see if something is coming in. I don't see something yet, so maybe you have to find it. Hello from Hamburg, from Fabienne, from Berlin, from Semi, someone from Salzburg, Stefan, Austria. Great. So now you see it. And I'm sitting in Berlin as well, and happy to have you. So please use the chat. I will be following it. And then in the end, we answer all the questions together in the Q&A. But for sure, you can also exchange any comments or share links and so on. And why are we doing the choice events? Many of you have probably joined already before. For some, they are new. They are our bi-weekly event series where we have put the focus on introducing solutions, best practices, experts who help companies to reduce CO2. And we do that as we are also a climate tech company from Berlin, building our climate intelligence platform to allow companies to decarbonize not only their own company, but to work along the supply chain to do so. And as we are all just starting that journey, that's why we have these events to really help each other out, find best practices and move forward. And that's also what we have been doing over summer. Some of you might know we have the Climate Summit as an online summit conference that grew in the last 3 years. We had this year over 1,000 participants from 55 different countries joining, and more than 50 experts from climate science to corporates and startups joining all their best practices and work. And we have been putting all of that together and provide you our best practice guide, where we have on about 40 pages all the insights from the summit about the status quo of the climate transformation and what are the next essential steps to really move forward in decarbonizing along the supply chain. So if you want to have this one, you find in the chat now the link to the best practice guide. I'm just looking, yes. My colleague Enya has been just posting it. So if you want to have it, just find it there or on our website. And That brings me to today's choice event. So as said, I will not be here alone. We always have experts. And actually, I'm super happy to have the first time today, one of my co-founders, Yasha Tarani, with me here. But also he will be not alone. I'm really, really happy to have Max from AMC Group here. And they will be both talking about how to kick off supply chain decarbonization and why it's so important to have a data foundation for it, how we go from data collection to concrete actions. And before I invite them, it's again your turn to become a little bit more interactive before you lean back. So I share you a small survey, which you can easily answer by choosing one of the answers on the screen. So we like to ask you if you have already in your company, I started with the second one, I guess, before this, before the first one, but it's also okay. So do you have already climate targets for your procurement team in your company? So either the question or the answer is yes, or no, we are still in planning mode, or no, not yet planned, or I don't know, I'm not working in probably both of these fields or one of the fields. And I see a lot of answers already come in. And I'm a little bit surprised. So I'm going to share the answers. And you should be able to see them now. So actually 17% of the people answering have said yes, our climate targets are aligned with the procurement department already, and 37% have been saying no, but they are in planning stage. So that makes already 50% of people who have them climate targets and are thinking how to introduce them to procurement. And the others are no, not yet planned, or I don't know, which is just 15%. And now I'm not that sure because I'm mixed both, but I'm gonna ask it anyway. If it still makes sense, let's see how it goes. My first question was actually if you have climate targets. So let's see if it matches up with a little bit the answers you gave before. So how many of you actually have climate targets for your company that have a time plan to reduce CO2? And yeah, that should be somehow linking to the other question and the other way around. Good. As you're really quick, I give you a few more seconds for everyone who wants to participate. And gonna show you again the results. So yeah, almost 50% have said yes, which is 46%, and then 38% have said no, but in planning stage. So that kind of matches and is really interesting. So we have a lot of experts here who are already in the field of climate target setting, but then the next challenge is to go into the supply chain. And I think that's a perfect introduction then of Max and Yasha. You both should be already hearing me. Welcome on stage. Hi, Max. Hi, Yasha. How are you guys?
Very good.
Very good so far. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, you have both not yet been here in a choice event, but Yasha has been following them. So I hope you are not too excited and just excited to share your insights. So I will be just listening, and I think Yasha, I stop presenting and you can share the slides. And yes, I will be following, listening, and looking a little bit in the chat. So again, just drop any questions you guys have, and then we see us later for the Q&A from my side.
Sounds good.
See you in a bit.
So then, yeah, also, yeah, hello from our side. Really excited to be here and tell you about our experience and learnings from data collection to concrete action in supply chain decarbonization. Really happy to collaborate on this one with Max from AMC Group, who we're partnering with on projects. And maybe I'll give the word to Max first and for a quick introduction.
Yeah, thank you very much. Also from my side, very welcome. My name is Max Droste. I'm based in Cologne, as is AMC. We're just around the corner in Bonn. AMC Group is a strategy consultancy for purchasing and supply chain, and we focus a lot of on process improvement, but also with regard to sustainability, we have quite a good functional model that we will talk about a little bit in today's session. And yeah, I'm looking forward to the insights and the questions that you have. I think the survey already showed a good start, which is always nice. Usually we start these surveys and ask what companies already have as CO2 reduction goals, and then to figure out if the procurement department are aligned. And I guess we did it the other way around, but still the nice outcome was that a lot of companies do have aligned goals and that they are actually even broken down into the procurement processes. But we will dive into this here deeper in a second. So yeah, back to Yasha.
Yeah, also a quick few words about myself. I'm Yasha. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO at The Climate Choice. I mainly work with companies on projects around data collection from suppliers in relation to climate targets and decarbonization targets for suppliers. So yeah, really happy to start into today's webinar. And Max, I'll go to the first slide. So I'm really happy to kick it off.
Yeah, sounds good. So the first question that we had and we want to talk about here is, what is the new role of procurement for climate strategies of future-oriented companies? And when we discussed our topics and insights, the question really came up, and what is a future-oriented company, right? That's the first part. So when we talk about future-oriented companies, we think of well-managed companies. We think of companies that understand the urgency to act. And we think of companies that set clear targets. So looking back at the survey from the beginning, I think we all understand here that you are part of future-oriented companies because you do have targets. Also, it's important that these targets do go beyond scope 1 and 2, because we all understand that a majority of the climate emissions and emissions that exist go beyond scope 1 and 2. They originate in the supply chain. And that is the important thing where procurement and supply chain professionals come in. So this was the second part of the question: what is the role of procurement? And we chose this little picture to just visualize it a little bit. So in today, or in the past, sustainability topics were still discussed, so to speak, in the ivory tower, and a lot of times did not find their way into the nitty-gritty daily business processes. In the future, and exactly looking at this information with regard to scope 2, this is going to change. So procurement is going to become the most relevant actor in a company's effort to reduce emissions. If you look at the effort, and if you look at the lever that you have with regarding to the supply chain, you have a gigantic responsibility and a big opportunity to help in this process. So when we talk about procurement, the role of procurement is shifting. It becomes the most relevant actor, as we just said here. It has to help in this process from forming a supply chain into a supply network. When we work in projects, we like to use this supply network wording, because this chain is a very linear function, and in a network we understand that we all work together. So its role, or the role of procurement, is to create a space and empower collaboration, right? And build a supplier network that allows cooperation and allows this process and change to happen. So I think this is a good setting and a good start for today's topic. We talked a little bit about the urgency. We understand that it is important, but the question is, how do you bring these goals that you define in your targets, in your CO2 targets, how do you bring them to action, right? So we are talking today about these things. In the preparation for the webinar, I came across a study from the World Business Council on Sustainable Development, and it talked about how we can encourage this network to function, and how do we go into, let's say, in this modus from encouraging maybe to even enforcing certain decarbonization standards. So the main topics in there were, you have to create a sense of urgency, you have to build good supplier relationships, and you have to be able to implement a standardized framework. I think at this point, we really don't have to talk about urgency a lot anymore. We see it every day. We see it in the news. We see it in our daily lives. Climate change is real. Climate change is happening, and we all are affected. So now it becomes more questionable. How do we build good supplier relationships? How do we implement a standardized framework? And that's where processes come into place, and that's where procurement comes into place, as procurement is basically the manager in this network of relationships. And the nice thing is that procurement is becoming more important. In the past, I think it was always a little bit in the back office. But with these facts that we just saw, it's becoming a lot more at the forefront of this climate battle. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Yasha is going to explain a little bit more detailed how solutions and how technology can help you gather information in this process. And in the second step, we are going to take a little highlight and take a little dive in how we usually structure projects and how we come from this actual data collection to concrete action. And if we have time afterwards, we'll take a quick look at some processes in procurement and how they are able to, or how we are able to adapt them and make sure that sustainability issues are at the forefront of these nitty-gritty processes.
Right, and with that, I'll take over again on my part. So thank you, Max, for the introduction into that topic. I will start with a quick excursus around actually why is this so relevant for procurement. First of all, when looking at emissions and where emissions come from, it is now known that especially a lot of emissions are coming from so-called scope 3 upstream emissions. Actually, a CDP study, which is the Carbon Disclosure Project, found out that upstream scope 3 emissions are actually 11.4 times bigger than total emissions. That means that they account for up to 85% of total emissions in companies. And these scope 3 upstream emissions are especially if we look at the next study, which was done by CDP in collaboration with Boston Consulting Group, you can see that a lot of emissions are actually purchased, so so-called scope 3.1 emissions. And you can see that depending on what kind of company you run, so if you're more working on raw materials, your emissions would come from your own operations, as you can see here with the blue, or also from consumed power, depending on which raw materials you are producing, but then if you look into end products, so things like the industry of fast-moving consumer goods, fashion, food, automotive, construction, electronics that actually use those raw materials or use products that are built out of the raw materials, the emissions are actually coming from scope 3 upstream from the supply chain, so from the suppliers. So basically we're saying every buying decision is actually a climate decision. Of course, it's not only products, it's also logistics, it's also investments and so on. There's a lot of emission categories, but we're focusing on the emission category of 3.1 today, and how to understand on what suppliers that are actually supplying products and services to your companies, on how to work with those, and especially around data collection and collaboration. Typically, when we think about data collection from suppliers, we run into a big issue. So I don't know how many of you have already made the experience and requested information from suppliers around their corporate carbon footprints, or their product carbon footprint information, or any other climate related information. The issue is often that first of all, the climate maturity of suppliers is really diverse. So there is a lot of companies that are unable to answer these questions at the moment. Then the next challenge is that there's no comparable data often available, and it's really hard to understand, okay, how was actually the data calculated? Often there's no decarbonization expertise, no sustainability expertise in the companies available, and also no decarbonization roadmaps. And currently we're seeing that there's collaborative tools they're currently missing on how to actually streamline this first data collection process, but also the collaboration process with suppliers to actually get into action and actually achieve also decarbonization and not only collect data. So basically what that means is that your climate targets are at risk if your suppliers are not aligned with your climate strategies. And this is what we are focused on. So how do we actually align suppliers on our climate strategies, and how do we collaborate and work together? And that is very much what Max already mentioned, thinking about networks, about collaboration, about mutual efforts. How do we work on eye level with our business partners to achieve our common goal to actually reach net zero and transition into a low carbon economy? And really the baseline, of course, is always to understand or to actually obtain reliable primary data for collaboration and for capacity building, actually. And when we think about baselining on emission data, most of you or most of us, I guess, probably think about CO2 emission data. But we believe that CO2 emission data is not sufficient for collaboration. The issue is, of course, often just information is available on a corporate level and not on a product level. But then, especially, it's very hard to understand. Okay, how will the company actually evolve into the future? I mean, CO2 emission or CO2 footprints or CO2 footprints are basically a lagging KPI, right? So it basically tells you much about the past performance of a company and how was that translated into emissions. But we also want to understand, when working with companies, how they are managing actually this transition to a low carbon economy, and how they actually planning to decarbonize, which means understanding also so-called leading KPIs or information about the actually implementation of the climate strategy. So we want to also understand, have companies set climate targets? Are they aligned with our targets? What are the governance processes in the companies? Do they manage risk that is associated to climate change? And how transparent are they around this information in general, both internally and externally? And of course, if you go into this, you can think of 1,000 things to basically ask and to understand. But we looked at various frameworks and really found that there is really good frameworks that you can look at and actually build your data collection process on. And we mainly focus on the recommendations of TCFD, that is based on information around governance. So is there board oversight and involvement? Is there in climate change risk and opportunities? Is there management roles in the companies that are concerned with reaching climate targets? Is there climate accountabilities? And then also, are there management processes around that? Then also, it provides information about risk management. So how should actually companies, how do companies have actually set up processes to identify, assess, and manage climate-related risks and opportunities? And also, is there an integration into an overall risk management structure? When it comes to climate targets, of course, you will think about science-based targets initiative. So looking at reduction targets in all scopes, and also other climate relevant targets like energy, water and waste. For transparency, of course, there's various frameworks and guidelines on how to on understanding disclosure processes, stakeholder involvement, and also social responsibility and annual reporting, especially, for example, from the Global Reporting Initiative, but also in Germany we have the Deutsche Nachhaltigkeitskodex or other frameworks that really give good guidance around that as well. And then, of course, understanding the metrics and KPIs is really important, because we want to use those also for our reporting again, and kind of like moving from average data or average calculations to more primary data, and actually using the information that suppliers can provide us based on their calculations. And the good thing is that, of course, the regulatory climate-related disclosure requirements are aligned with those frameworks, especially the recommendations of TCFD and, of course, greenhouse gas protocol. And that's why it's really important to not kind of like come up with new things, but rather use existing recommendations and frameworks to make sure there is kind of like interoperability or now I'm missing the English word, but yeah, interoperability is probably the right word to use. When it now comes to data collection, it's very important again to think about networks, right? So in our experience, when we work with companies and support them in this data collection process, it's very important to think about this as not as a one-sided process. So data collection is not a means to an end, right? We want to actually do something with that information, and basically the nose, or what we see often happening, is that there's only a data request without a feedback loop on actually providing the supplier the information on what actually happens with the data, what is the outcome of the data collection, is there any value for the company in this data collection, or what can they maybe kind of like get as a feedback from the data that they provided from you as a company. So the issue with that is that often this leads to low participation and also to little value added. So there's little action that you can derive if there's only a data request. As mentioned, it's really important to actually put you into the shoes of the person that or the company that needs to provide the information and actually receive the data requests, and actually provide them support, provide them feedback, and really help them to improve along the way. Our best practices for data collection that we have derived from our experience is really that it's very important to have a trustful relationship, to be transparent about how you will use that data. That it maybe doesn't mean that a supplier won't be able to supply you in the future, but you basically want to understand on how you can collaborate on actually going successful together into the future. And also provide clear incentives like feedback, providing benchmarks and insights into what actually the data can help you to understand. As mentioned, also sharing results and also investing in this relationship is we view this as very, very important, and also have experienced very, very good outcomes with that. So now a little bit into digital tools, and of course we are one of the tools, right? We're very focused on climate specific information. And want to show you how we are streamlining this whole process. And we've developed a software platform, as Lara already mentioned in the beginning, which basically provides an end-to-end software solution to collect, manage, and also track, audit, quality supplier climate data. So our process is really that we've developed a framework, a standardized framework and methodology to assess companies based on the frameworks that I've mentioned, and really focus on specific information that also is necessary also for regulatory disclosure. We also derive recommendations and for actions out of these assessments, and really help companies to understand, okay, what is good, how do they compare to other companies, can they get benchmarks out of this, and learnings on how they can position themselves also for the future, and actually start working on decarbonization. All of that, of course, is then integratable into systems. So we don't want to build data silos anymore, right? The world needs to be interoperable, and we want to collaborate as well. And we're thinking also about that in networks. All the data should be, of course, be secure, be available via APIs, and be integratable into systems that different companies use. Our software is really focused on this collaboration part and providing, on the one side, audit-ready data on the climate performance and strategy for companies that want to work with their suppliers, but also at the same time supports the suppliers in their decarbonization journey. And we call this climate intelligence platform, and as mentioned, the suppliers go through an assessment that enables to collect this audit quality data and assess the climate maturity of suppliers, which is a very fast process, which we're actually also launching a new tool which is even free for suppliers to understand their climate maturity, but also providing assessments that give you very detailed information, but still is very usable and fast to use for suppliers. Then companies receive a scorecard that also can be used by procurement teams to understand, okay, how do different suppliers evolve over time, and how can we actually support them on specific areas, and then also providing this and the analysis of the granular data points and providing this into your own reporting is one of the goals. As mentioned, and that's my last slide about our approach here, is that we really focus on empowering buyers to collaborate with suppliers for decarbonization with really scalable tools. And we always think about, okay, how can this data collection and collaboration process be streamlined to thousands of companies, right? So we always believe that this always should be very valuable for both sides independently. So of course, for buyers, it's about receiving primary data. Also, we're collecting third-party data on understanding, if a supplier maybe has already made disclosures to any public entity. We want to, of course, provide that, and also all the data is externally auditable to provide the highest quality of information. As mentioned, for the suppliers, it's about complying with customers and regulatory reporting requirements in the specific climate area. We provide then ratings and recommendations to the suppliers to improve over time. We provide benchmarks and analysis to improve and really focus on automating supply chain decarbonization programs. And how that can be used then also to be integrated into your procurement processes. I want to now hand over again to Max for the next slide.
Yeah, thank you very much for your insights. Looking at the time and hopefully some valid questions that we have afterwards, I'm going to try to keep it a little bit shorter with regard to the usual project steps that we have here. But maybe as an introduction, the best solution doesn't help if you don't have a clear goal. And I think you all already said that you have clear targets in your company, which is already the first step and really good. And now the question is, how do you bring it into operation and how do you implement? How we usually go through in these projects is 4 steps, fairly easy. We start with a materiality analysis and focus at the top. So when it comes to emissions and reducing emissions, obviously you want to start with the big players, and you can do a regular, ABC analysis. Everybody in procurement is very clear with that. But also with regard to materiality, it's more, what's your impact? What's the impact on the supplier that you have, and how can you shape this collaboration, and how can you work together with them, right? But obviously you're starting at the top and you want to identify the biggest polluters, so to say, but also figuring out maybe who is willing to collaborate, right? So you want to make sure that you have a good mix of somebody that makes impact, but also that is willing to go this journey with you together. So when we start in these projects, we typically shoot for roughly 5 top suppliers that we can work with to define the process and to also make it practical. So in the next step, then we do the climate performance, as Yasha just pointed out, and do this assessment and really understand, so to speak, a baseline, right? So we want to develop. So we have to figure out where we are standing. And once we've defined a clear target, once we've cleared a baseline and we have identified who we want to work with, we come up with concrete measures. So if you go to the next slide, I think Now I've already made the good overview, but just as an example here, you know, as the materiality analysis on the right hand, something like an easy XY matrix where you can plot what the effort is and the willingness of your supplier to work with. And really start at the top, right? Don't overwhelm yourself. Start with 5, clear the process and work on the goals. In the next step, you can go to the next slide. You have the actual climate performance where we assess and see where the current suppliers are standing. And I think Yasha has already pointed out quite in detail what happens here in this step. The nice thing is also from the software that it comes up with a certain amount of recommendations, because that's really the point where you need to start working, right? So if you go to the phase 3 there, the determination of concrete measures, that's where you put some meat on the bone, right? So you figure out, okay, we have a goal, where do we want to be, and how do we get there? And at the end of the day, yeah, you can get insights from the software and everything, but you need to sit down, you need to collaborate, you need to understand where your focus can be. And we usually do that in daily or in one-day workshops together with the suppliers, where we really do a brainstorming of activities, because usually, as you know, especially coming from a procurement background, the suppliers are the ones that have the knowledge, right? They understand their business model, they understand most of the time where their biggest levers are to reduce carbon emissions. So enable this, give the room for improvement, give the room and provide the room for collaboration. And that brings us to the next step here, this optimization of procedural sustainability, or the consequence, right? And I think I would rather focus this time here on the processes, because that's where it's so important. When we look at the processes, this is where you can implement. And I think the goal of future-oriented and thinking companies in procurement department is not to have an individual sustainability or decarbonization process in their framework, but to understand that all the main processes in procurement need to become more sustainable, right? So all of them have the possibility to adapt and introduce sustainability aspects or decarbonization aspects. And that's kind of what I want to focus here the last couple of minutes before we go into the Q&A, because what you can see here as a sketch is our AMC functional model. It describes basically the 89 core processes that happen in supply chain and procurement. And yes, they are a lot because that's a lot that's happening. And we can focus here, for example, on the strategic processes. But I think in the next slides, I do have a little bit of a better overview where you can see better. And when we take a look at these processes, so you can move further one more. Yeah, I guess that's the main message that I want you to keep all here, that compliance and sustainability do not come from declarations of intent, but have to be focused and anchored in the processes, just like we talked about here a second ago. So in the next slide, you have a better overview of this process model. So when we talk about purchasing processes, we think about 4 pillars, right? We think about strategic processes, we think about tactical processes, we think about operational processes, and we have a bunch of services like data management that help to provide here. When we talk about strategic processes, this is really, they provide the planks in which procurement and supply chain operates. So as an example here, you have supplier management, but also category management, all of these processes that have been utilized and developed well throughout the procurement scene for years, right? So this is kind of what I'm saying. When we don't need a new sustainability process, we need to make sure that the existing processes are so robust and flexible that you can increase and include sustainability aspects in here. So on the next slide, you can see supplier management in a more detailed function. The regular circle with regard to supplier management goes through these 7 steps, right? So you think about a supplier structure, you have a pre-qualification process, you have supplier evaluation, you classify your suppliers after evaluating them, you create a strategy, and you develop them. So this is a classical process that has been taking part in procurement for years. And the question now and the challenge is, how do we include decarbonization efforts and how do we include sustainability efforts in here? And all of these steps and individual steps here bring with them good points. include sustainability points. So if we just look at pre-qualification, for example, we always talk about pre-qualification sort of as the door policy of the company, right? So in the supplier structure, you define who you want to work with in the future. In the pre-qualification, you decide who gets to come into your company and work with you. So you have to understand at this point, what are your targets, right? So if you have a clear target that you want to reduce your CO2 emissions, is that already part of your pre-qualification process? Do you already have certain criteria that future suppliers have to meet in order to be able to supply to you? That's what you need to think about. We just talked about these strategic processes. So we're still in this strategic area, but once you go down one area into the tactical processes, for example, sourcing, it becomes very clear. If you want sustainability to be at the forefront of your company and on your success, has it already been taken into consideration when you talk about sourcing and the criteria? So when we ask these questions and ask companies whether they take sustainability into consideration when it comes to sourcing, a lot of people say yes. But then we look at the actual process and say, what are the 5 criteria that you have and that you rate next to quality, price, and all of these issues with regard to sustainability? And a lot of times we see that sustainability in the nitty-gritty process still hasn't found its way. So that's one of the main points that I want to get across here today is look at the existing processes. Don't come up with a new process. Find the existing ones. They are not responsibility of the quality department. They are responsibility of the procurement department, and make sure that you include criteria to match these targets from your company in the process, because only then you can have the buy-in with your suppliers to work on this and create basically a continuous process for improvement. Yeah, that's really the key points here in process and how we work in these projects. And I think on the next slide, we just have a couple of key takeaways. Oh, no, never mind. I'm sorry. This is one step back. So looking at the sub processes that I just showed you in the supplier relationship process, as we just talked about here, you have possibilities to include decarbonization or sustainability in general in all of these process steps, right? So what is the supplier structure that you want to continue to work with? Are they fitting your vision and your mission for a company? How do you make sure that the suppliers that you want get into your supplier base? How do we evaluate them? Classical procurement topic. Everybody knows the supplier evaluation, whether you're ISO certified 9001, but do you only do it because you're ISO certified, or do you want to use the supplier evaluation as a tool to drive sustainability? Because at that point, once you rate and evaluate your suppliers, you can drive classification and you can drive development together with them. And only then can you actually work with them on a coherent strategy and develop your suppliers in the right direction that you want to go with. So as you see, that's one of the main key takeaways here, to make sure that you have robust processes, that you understand that you can build on the existing framework and include sustainability and decarbonization efforts in your existing framework. And I think looking at back at the slides that Yasha just showed us, we can see that the business case is there. I think I have that in the next slide if you want to move forward one more. Supply chain decarbonization, sustainability in general is not a cost driver, right? It's a perfectly justifiable investment in the future of a business process, of a business model, and it needs to be included in the processes. Decarbonization, sustainability, we've seen they are purchasing issues. They are not for the ivory tower anymore. Procurement has impact on 80% of emissions in the supply chain. Take it and run with it. Take the opportunity to shape the topic. From purchasing, you have a gigantic amount of spend that you can put in the right direction, and you have a lot of impact that you can create. And at the end of the day, sustainability cannot be just written in declarations. It has to be in the nitty-gritty processes. It has to be included in procurement and supply chain processes, whether it's sourcing, whether it's category management, whether it's supplier relationship management. Make sure that you test your processes and understand where you have the possibility to include these aspects. right? And I think we almost did a point landing here with regard to the time.
Yeah, maybe also, yeah. Thanks a lot, Max. Just also wanted to add on also a takeaway around data collection and also on top of that, I mean, in the end, it is also about measuring the impact that you can have and actually being able to report that impact internally, but also externally. So understanding not only or savings in emissions that you can actually achieve through those process optimizations and efforts is also, of course, a very extremely important. And as Max said, we're seeing CO2 emissions and especially climates are getting bottom line relevant, not only from a marketing and consumer perspective or from a customer perspective and a revenue perspective, but also from a cost perspective, very much. We're now looking forward to your question. AMC and us, we got together to set up a procurement checklist for decarbonization. It's free for you to download. Just scan the code, and happy to give it over to Lara again. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for both of you to guiding us through a topic that's normally day filling in a workshop. So like really well done to just boil it down to like little less than half an hour or something. So that is super challenging, I know. And probably also for everyone watching that brought from time to time questions. So just a quick reminder, drop anything you have on thoughts or comments in the Q&A box. Also, if you want to share what maybe your topics are that you're already doing with your suppliers, it's also cool. Just share your insights. Otherwise, we have already quite some questions, and maybe I would also just start with a comment. So I think what I took away is like really this complexity that we have right now to like not only internally bring climate to the different departments and work together. So to procurement is also impacting finance and, like you said, also the quality department, but then also to go beyond the company and really work with everyone who's affecting like your climate impact, who's basically in the supply chain. So to really bring from your internal climate management everything to a collaborative tool as well to work with your suppliers. And I think from that, I would also take the first question that I remember here from the chat, and it started asking actually, when we talk about suppliers, right? And Yasha, you showed the scope 1, 2, 3. Who are they? Like there are so many stakeholders in your supply chain or people you are working with, and here it has very precisely. Do the suppliers also have the people in mind from like a daughter company, like any supplier that's part of a daughter company? So it becomes really complex if you have a corporate and then different corporates under it, or companies under it, daughter companies, and then all their suppliers. So I think also, Max, you showed that with this matrix, where to start and actually find out with whom you should go into closer interaction, because there are probably hundreds and thousands. So maybe both of you want to give a quick answer on that, where to start with, which suppliers to collaborate with.
Fairly simple, start at the top, right? I mean, this is a question that's been discussed more and more. We're looking at scope 3 primarily here. So obviously it goes all the way to the end of the supply chain, but your ability to act also decreases, right? So you want to make sure that you have a certain lever and handle on the actors that you work with. You also have to make sure that you find the right ones that are willing to work with. From a purchasing standpoint, we are always looking at direct suppliers, because it's really hard to get past this tier N line. I think we see issues like that with the German due diligence law, and I think some of this question might be targeted in that direction. I think you have an upcoming session in the coming weeks on the supply chain due diligence law. But obviously, it's harder to go further past tier 1, right? And for us right now, what we focus on here really is tier 1 and the suppliers that we have a direct relationship with, and also enforce and encourage them to work with their own supply chain. So really, it's a trickle down issue.
Yeah, and maybe just to add on a little bit what Max already said, but yeah, we mostly look at suppliers first that have the biggest impact, right? So looking at, okay, what's the largest spend categories, what are the top suppliers that are mostly like often also account for the biggest part of the emissions, and starting there. In regards to corporate facility level, product level information, I'm seeing some questions here. Of course, you like some suppliers, for example, then say, okay, we have specifically only providing products from this specific facility to companies versus other companies that are only like a smaller company or medium-sized business that only have one facility. So it gets quite complex and it gets quite challenging. And for now, also what is really important to understand that as mentioned in the beginning, the largest challenge, especially when it comes to product-related information, is that it doesn't exist today. So we actually need to take the suppliers from where they are currently at and must appreciate wherever a business is at the moment, and allow them also to, or allow any business and I think I include everyone, I think, to start where they currently are, and really enabling everyone to go along these steps and along the way. That's why we also are launching, as mentioned, a free product actually for suppliers that is really fast and gives them a first overview on what they can do to improve and how they can actually become ready to provide that information on a product level, or even in the future if that of course that's what we're looking for, right? In general. But yeah, currently we need to appreciate where companies are and use the information that they can provide for now, and actually work on that to get them ready. I hope that also helps. Maybe another. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, I have also another question found in the chat, maybe quick from my side. Max, again, a question to you, because you showed that very nice graphic, and I think we're going to show it in our climate magazine later. So we normally put all the insights in our blog as well. You can find them in a few days. You showed like how the procurement process can be integrated, or like how you can bring sustainability and integrate it in the existing processes, and that you don't have to come up with new ones. Mm-hmm. And that you can also see with whom we are working where, and how you evaluate suppliers and then develop them. And I think the key word is maybe developing, because that wasn't the questions here, that typically in a supply chain you have hundreds and thousands maybe of small and medium-sized companies who are not maybe yet so far to do everything already. So what is your maybe learning? Does it need different approaches for different size of companies, or how can you really make sure that especially the SMEs are gaining insights and can really become a climate champion, as we always call it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously the functional model is catered towards bigger, small and medium companies, I would say, because if you're a one-man or woman show in procurement, obviously you don't have a big difference between strategic procurement, operative procurement. But the main point that I can say for SMEs is you probably have to start with your own focus, right? And maybe do the materiality analysis for yourself, and the right starting point, even in communication to the bigger companies, which I think this question was going to, that the corporations are just throwing responsibilities and requirements over the fence to the SMEs here in Germany, is start working, start understanding what your impact is. And maybe before you focus on your supply chain, you focus on yourself and say, what's our impact? Where do we, you have scope 1 and 2 emissions. That's a great start to understand your own impact. And once you have a clear understanding of what your impact is and what the general risks, let's say, with regard to the due diligence law or other thing is with regard to your value chain, then you can look beyond, right? So I think the starting point for SMEs really is focus on yourself, set a clear target and understand what you want to do, and then work with your suppliers. But as you said, a lot of times in this connection, then the supplier of the small company is a rather larger company. So you have little to no lever with regards to helping them. But on the other hand, you can draw upon their knowledge and maybe say, hey, you're a lot bigger. What's your take on this? We have issues. We struggle with that. So back to this collaboration idea, just start talking. That's the one main point I would say.
Great sentence. Yasha, collaboration, you had also something to add, but maybe I give you also the extra question, because I think that fits perfectly to the collaboration approach. Someone asked, like, how do we really ensure to have a consistent data collection and like really provide the methodology for companies to compare these, or first to collect these data and make them comparable. So maybe just to touch on that quickly, like how does that look? And please feel free
first of all,
to add.
really, of course, a very big challenge, of course, right? How do you get consistency in data and data collection processes? We've spent a lot of time, and especially our co-founder and chief data scientist, Dr. Ray Farhan, on developing methodologies and on how to collect the data. We provide also guidance on the methodology, on how to provide or what information we kind of like accept and to understand if data is provided, how was it calculated, was it externally certified, is it or reviewed, was it calculated towards the ISO standards, etc. So it's a tough challenge, and of course then it's we want to make sure we get we cater to the kind of like reporting requirements. So that is what we focus on here at the Climate Choice, and also make that methodology transparent, of course, to for companies that go through this assessment. But yes, it's probably a topic that can be whether we could go into very deep, because especially around product related information, of course, there's a lot of currently a lot of or at least standardization approaches going on, and this work hasn't been finalized yet. So that is of course a very complex topic. Maybe also one question that I think is relevant, because I also quoted CDP, is also how do we differentiate from the CDP to our approach from the CDP supply chain module, which asks suppliers for the same information like you. I mean, we look at CDP is very we are supplementary, I guess, to the CDP approach. In general, we focus to really get suppliers where they currently are. It's also interoperable with CDP data, so we can also, if suppliers have CDP data, actually digest that data and provide analysis on that as well. The general approach is that we most likely are a little bit faster and a little bit easier to provide the data to, and then maybe next step, or if suppliers are ready to provide CDP level information, then this is also something that can work. But in general, we focus a lot more on the small medium businesses, and actually to get this kind of like include every company enabling every company to comply with the requirements, and kind of like take them or help them where they currently stand, and then develop them to really be able to report.
Yeah, that probably fits to the question also, like how do you deal with SMEs, because we often see like they're maybe not the ones who are yet ready to fill out the CDP questionnaire and take part in that, and that's where software can really help to scale things up and make it easier and faster. We, as said, like could talk the whole day about it and make a whole workshop with you about it, which is not the topic of today, and we made it within 1 hour. So thanks a lot for joining. And I'm really excited that also the next choice event in 2 weeks will be touching on the topic of supply chain. So we will look into the supply chain law and the changes there, and what to else look at. Like climate is always a topic, but social indicators for sure as well. And as usual, I would give the hand over to both. If someone just finished lunch, listened in the whole hour, but had a lot to digest now, like what is maybe the one key message you want to have them to take away and be very motivated to kick off maybe within the next weeks or days? So Max, any last thought or a sentence to share?
My key takeaways, I think I put on the slide, put your money where your mouth is, start with the processes, make sure you don't come up with a new sustainability or decarbonization process, but make sure that all your core processes are sustainability fit and ready. And yeah, it's not a nice to have, it's a must have.
Nice one. Yasha, any thoughts?
Yeah, also in relation to what Max just said, I mean, like we don't always need to invent the wheel new. Of course, decarbonization is a very new challenge. A lot of companies are trying and doing their best and finding new ways. But as Max said, there's a lot of processes and systems that we can build on top of and look at frameworks that are giving us guidance and help us to really yeah, work on reaching our common goal of reaching net zero. And yeah, thanks a lot. For me, it was also again motivating and also really great for all your questions and seeing you so engaged. So thanks a lot for participating, and yeah, wish you a great week.
Cool.
Yeah,
so just a very big topic to the end. Let's all work on becoming net zero, which I think will be for the next decades really the topic to go. And I think we made clear today is nothing that comes overnight, but it really starts with decarbonizing your supply chain and going into scope 3, making all the effort there, but using it for opportunities and like finding new ways to collaborate. So thanks a lot to both of you. It was really a pleasure to join this time, so to say, and to hear everything from you. And yeah, great to work together with you, C Group or Max in this case today, and excited to share more about that in the next weeks. So from my side, have a wonderful afternoon from everywhere you joined in.
Bye.
And yeah, see you next time in the Choice